and welcome back this evening to Animals and the Law Today. As I mentioned during our last broadcast, the Humane Society of the United States has filed a false claims action against the Hallmark Meat Company. The Hallmark Meat Company was found to have seriously abused the farm animals that it keeps at its slaughterhouse. Slaughterhouse is an interesting term. I don't know where that comes from. It certainly isn't a house. The Chino, California company has been charged with selling falsely has been sued by the Humane Society of the United States because it sells its meat through the school lunch program to the federal government. And when it sold that meat, it advertised the meat as being humanely slaughtered as required by the Federal Humane Slaughter Act, and in fact it was not. The film that was produced by the Humane Society of the United States showed the cows who were, quote, down cows, and that is cows that have broken limbs or are so very ill that they can't stand up, being dragged across their pens by men in forklift-type trucks. At any rate, the Humane Society of the United States, as I have indicated, has sued the company, and if the Humane Society is successful in their suit, they will be able to recover the full value of all of the meat that was sold under contract by Hallmark to the federal government for the school lunch programs. This law, as I indicated before, is 150 years old. It was originally promulgated in 1863 when war profiteers during the Civil War were selling to the federal government horses and mules who were ill or lame. And it allows essentially a private citizen to sue on behalf of the federal government for fraud against the government, essentially arming the citizenry in the battle against fraud. The law essentially then deputizes private citizens as assistant or as attorney generals, assistant attorney generals. And you ask, why would this relate to animals other than through something like a slaughterhouse? Well, I think it has been used, and it would be very efficiently used in a lawsuit brought by someone working for a researcher in a research institution, for example, like the one here in Madison. Much of the research using animals in research institutions at universities is funded by the federal government, by the National Institute of Health. And if you are working in such a lab or for some other reason have information that the statistics that are being reported to the government in the grant proposals is in fact not true, you could file a claim against the researcher and the institution on behalf of the federal government. The procedure for doing so is fairly straightforward. You put together a statement of all of the facts that you are aware of, and you file it with the federal district court, which is here in Madison, if you're suing, for example, the University of Wisconsin. You also serve a copy of your complaint on the U.S. attorney, who is also here in Madison. And for 60 days, the U.S. attorney then reviews the complaint, talks to you, perhaps interviews other people, and determines whether or not the U.S. government would like to intervene. If the U.S. government intervenes, then they will take over the prosecution. If they decline to intervene, then you essentially are responsible for bringing the case. If you have a case, if you have evidence of any kind of fraud, and you prevail, you are entitled to anywhere from 10 to 25% of the value of the grant being received by the researcher times 3. That's treble damages. So if you have a researcher, for example, who has received $5 million over the last 5 years to study whatever it might be, alcohol in rhesus macaques, for example. And the researcher is claiming that it is using X number of monkeys, and in fact is not using that number of monkeys, is using fewer monkeys, such that the statistical validity, of that research is questionable. You may have a cause of action under the False Claims Act. $5 million grant from NIH times 3 is $15 million of fraudulently obtained money from the NIH. You would, as the complainant, as I indicated, be entitled to up to 25% of that amount. In addition, you would get your attorney's fees and your costs. Now, I'm not alleging that there's any fraud at all going on at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have no evidence that there is at this point. We are not in the labs. However, if you would like to do some good and maybe get rich in the process, the federal government has provided you with a clear opportunity to pursue such a claim. And that's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth today in animals and the law.